Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, and the fight for control of the country's airwaves. MySpace, YouTube, the online battlegrounds for the 2008 U.S. presidential elections. State-run television on the so-called Star Wars on Terror, and the art of the weather forecast. Welcome back to The Listening Post. Thousands of Venezuelans were on the streets of Caracas this past weekend. Some were protesting the closure of a television station, RCTV. Others were celebrating it. President Hugo Chavez blames the station for playing a central role in a coup against him back in 2002. That coup attempt failed, and in last year's elections, Chavez won easily. Now RCTV has been taken off the air, its license revoked. Chavez's critics call it the end of freedom of speech in Venezuela, and that's how much of the global mainstream media reported that story. But it's a little more complicated than that. In this week's News Divide, 5 years later, the fallout from what they're calling the world's first media coup. As midnight approached on May 27th and one of Venezuela's oldest and most popular TV channels prepared to fade to black once and for all, the crowds on the streets of Caracas grew. Those against the closure of RCTV argue that this was a case of basic human rights, symbolized by the station's staff who left their audience with the image of a media muzzled by the Chavez government.
It's a violation of freedom of expression so far. First, because it's protected in the Venezuelan constitution, and second, because the major, I would say, government in the world, which usually are democratic, are almost against this kind of decision.
Those in President Chavez's corner said that shutting down RCTV had to happen, that the station went too far.
Specifically by promoting and organizing a coup. That is what is at stake in Venezuela with the case of RCTV. It is simply not about free speech.
Spool back 5 years to 2002. Hugo Chavez was 2 years into his second term as president. He had won the votes of the poor, many of whom, like Chavez, are of African Indian heritage. The country's privately owned media were in the hands of Venezuelans of European descent. They are not supporters of Chavez or the revolution that he espouses.
90% of the media is in the hands of 5 or 6 monopoly media groups that are against the government, not only against the government, but that advocate violent overthrow of the democratically elected government. That is not democratic.
You have a crescendo of attacks against the government in the private media, which turns into an avalanche by the time of the coup.
As was documented in the film The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, the conflict came to a head in April 2002 with a call for a general strike. Chavez tried to commandeer the airwaves, but largely failed. RCTV was among the privately owned channels that pushed the bounds of opposition journalism and urged the country to support an anti-Chavez coup.
In the days running up to the coup, they aired adverts calling on their viewers and the public in general to overthrow the government.
They had a TV moment in which the generals that participated in the coup said publicly in TV stations, they said, "Thank you Venevisión, thank you RCTV for the role you played in changing the government and bringing back democracy." That's how they called it.
Debo decirlo, gracias Venevisión, gracias RCTV.
Yo voy a decir una cosa. The manner in which they were involved in preparing, in organizing and executing the coup, I think all this gives, makes the term the world's first media coup very, very relevant.
Hugo Chavez's supporters fought back, descending in their thousands on the presidential palace. They also converged on the TV station, demanding that RCTV broadcast images of President Chavez, who had been arrested and held at a military base. And they wanted the channel to show the pro-Chavez protests that were erupting around the country. RCTV refused. Instead, it showed a variety of entertainment programs.
They wanted everyone to think that everything was fine, that there'd been a change of government, and that everything was now back to normal.
But within 2 days, it became clear the coup leaders lacked the support of the Venezuelan majority, and Chavez was restored to power. In the 5 years since, he has won re-election with 63% support in an election validated by outside observers. And rather than immediately shutting down RCTV or any other channel that had backed the coup, Chavez waited until RCTV's broadcasting license came up for renewal. He then refused to grant RCTV a new license because of the role it played in the coup, and the channel was officially out of business.
In 2002, RCTV was not the only one supporting the coup. We know, and it's a public fact, that 3 other channels, important as well, supported the coup. But the difference between 2002 and 2007 is that the other TV channels, which were supporting, are not anymore. They just, if I can say, just choose their side. RCTV was in a different way by continuing to be one of the main media against, or not against, but which criticize Hugo Chavez.
President Chavez is a hugely polarizing figure. His decision to nationalize Venezuela's oil industry has made him enemies in the U.S. His blunt and undiplomatic ways,
"You are a donkey, Mr. Danger,"
invite criticism from abroad and the mainstream media.
Every time he opens his mouth.
Yeah.
From Haiti.
Keeps things interesting, at least.
Various international voices such as Human Rights Watch and the Committee to Protect Journalists consider the RCTV shutdown a setback for press freedom, and they downplay the extraordinary role the channel played in the 2002 coup. Most of the mainstream media outside Venezuela characterized the story that way. The CNN reporter T.J. Hughes said, RCTV is going to be shut down because President Hugo Chavez is not a big fan of it. Hughes called RCTV a voice of free speech that has been critical of Chavez's government. The Associated Press, which most major news organizations subscribe to, called RCTV a network that has been critical of Chavez. And the Washington Post's deputy editorial page editor wrote that RCTV's demise was more proof that President Chavez is a dictator. However, Hugo Chavez's supporters, and he was democratically elected, argue that there are some cases in which the media simply go too far, like what happened in Venezuela in April 2002.
What would happen in England if ITV promoted a coup, were a key actor in a coup against the Blair government? What would happen to ITV's license to broadcast? Most probably, I think, ITV owners or the people in charge would be held accountable. Maybe they would even go to jail.
Listening Post News Bites now. French President Nicolas Sarkozy has wasted no time in harnessing the power of the news media. 2 of Sarkozy's closest allies are set to take up key positions at TF1, France's most popular news channel. Sarkozy's former deputy campaign manager, Laurent Soli, has been named as a senior executive at TF1, and another close associate, Nance Paolini, has taken over as the CEO at the channel. Left-wing opposition groups and journalists' unions have accused Sarkozy of using Berlusconi-like tactics to control the media. TF1 gets huge news ratings, a 50% share for its evening news broadcast. The amount of time that U.S. news networks like Fox, CNN, and MSNBC dedicated to the Iraq War in the first quarter of 2007 has been revealed in a U.S. study by the Project for Excellence in Journalism. MSNBC leads the way with 31% of its news coverage dedicated to the war. CNN devoted about a quarter of its airtime to Iraq, while Fox lagged behind with only 15% of its news coverage focusing on Iraq. What was Fox covering instead? Well, according to the figures, Fox led all of the networks by devoting about 10% of its airtime to the death of the socialite Anna Nicole Smith. Al Hurra, the U.S. government-funded Arabic language television network, has landed in trouble with the U.S. Congress. The channel made changes recently to its leadership, but its attempt to become more newsy backfired when it aired the views of militant Islamic groups and covered a Holocaust deniers conference. Some members of Congress who rubber-stamped the channel's $60 million annual budget weren't happy about that. Al Hurra is trying to become more relevant in the Arab world, where it's largely viewed as a propaganda tool. Those changes at the top mean that now none of Al Hurra's senior executives actually speaks Arabic. Star Wars' creator, George Lucas, is known as Lucas the Litigator for fiercely defending his intellectual property. But To celebrate 30 years of Star Wars, Lucas has made hundreds of clips from all 6 Star Wars movies available on the internet for fans to remix and re-edit to make new stories, trailers, or music videos. The Star Wars website is also unveiling a collection of internet fan films, including Chad Vader, Day Shift Manager.
What is the meaning of this?
The meaning of what?
I ordered this task to be completed an hour ago.
Yeah, you did.
You have failed me for the last time.
There are already around 100,000 Star Wars-related clips on YouTube using unauthorized footage. By legitimizing the fan mashups and posting them on his official site, Lucas is trying to keep some control over his material and keep the Star Wars franchise alive. Turns out it's not just the would-be filmmakers of the internet who are taking a long look at George Lucas's work these days. This week's offering from the sometimes odd world of state-run television answers the question, what does Star Wars and the episode Revenge of the Sith have in common with what Washington calls the War on Terror? More than you'd think, according to Iranian state-run TV.
در واقع انتقام سیت فیلمی سیاسی است که درباره جهان آزاد در برابر یک امپراتوری شیطانی حرف می‌زند و نشان می‌دهد که حتی آن امپراتوری بد نیز در ابتدا یک جمهوری معمولی بوده است. قالب تحلیلگران سینمایی از این جهت حوادث و اتفاقهای انتقام سیت را با وقایعی که در دنیای سیاست ایالات متحده آمریکا رخ می‌داده سنجیده‌اند. یکی از دیالوگ‌هایی که معمولاً در تحلیل‌ها از آن یاد می‌شود جمله است که آناکین اسکایواکر در زمانی که دارد به دارت ویدر تبدیل می‌شود به زبان می‌آورد. جمله او این است: شما یا با من هستید یا دشمن محسوب می‌شوید. این جمله در واقع شباهت زیادی به جمله مشهور جورج بوش رئیس جمهور آمریکا دارد که بعد از حادثه 11 سپتامبر 2001 رسما اعلام کرد در جنگ علیه تروریسم شما یا با ما هستید یا دشمن ما محسوب می‌شوید.
Coming up in part 2, the U.S. presidential race and the internet, how web-based media are fighting for first place.